All right, folks, now that you have got an opportunity to read within the realist tradition, let's talk about the naturalist tradition. So I think it's helpful to get a sense of these two genres to compare the two. So realist novels are set in everyday locales. Naturalist novels are set in extreme settings. Realist characters usually middle class. Naturalist novels or naturalist stories generally involve lower class people, and this is a hallmark of the realist period. If you have noticed, much of the literature that we have read so far, at least the fictional literature, with the exception of reform narratives and abolition narratives, is centered around people of the middle class or higher, pretty comfortable people, right? Realism and naturalism started to look at the poor folks, and that had to do with the Gilded Age. Historically, this was a period of great wealth disparity. You had, the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, and then you had people working in steel mills. You had child labor. You had a lot of exploitation, a lot of poverty. And so realist plots are sort of about the restoration of order in a lot of ways. You see that in A Jury of Her Peers. I think in a sort of subverted way, that story is about restoring order. Whereas in naturalist stories, the characters are often confronting these major crises and they are destroyed by them. A realist would suggest that good typically prevails, and I think that Glaspell does believe good prevails in A Jury of Her Peers. Now, whether or not that's the case, I will leave that completely up to you. But naturalist characters are sort of doomed by fate. As well, realism is a rejection of the romantic hero, idealistic views. It's in favor of accurate depictions of real life, which is not always romantic, right? But naturalism is drawing from the Darwinian theory of evolution, which was published in 1859 with Darwin's Origin of the Species. And it's looking at a more scientific, objective approach. Now, characters in natural stories are often of the lower class. They're often driven by instinct or passion, and their attempts at exercising free will are often hamstrung by their choices. That's a quote from Campbell. It also, a big part of naturalist tradition is the theory of social Darwinism. Now, if you're familiar with Darwinism, it's the idea of the survival of the fittest, right? Well, social Darwinism is the idea that people of higher social status, wealthier people, are socially or are evolutionarily primed for that. They are biologically more fit to be wealthy, elite leaders, whatnot. And this is an idea that comes up in naturalist tradition. So the themes of naturalism, let's talk about what we see in naturalism. You see this theory of social Darwinism is very present. So in The Open Boat, you see a captain, you see a cook, you see the oiler, you see the correspondent, and their hierarchy is very clear. You also see objectivity, meaning there is really it's not really clear who we're supposed to root for in this story. I mean, I think we're supposed to root for all the characters, but we don't see the same sort of sympathetic, emotional approach to the characters that you would see in Romanticism. Determinism is also a big part of naturalism. Now, determinism is the belief that fate is predetermined. So it's sort of the opposite of free will. It's the belief that what's going to happen is going to happen and there's nothing that you can do to stop it. We also see the indifference of nature. And I think, for me, this is probably the most prominent theme of naturalism. So with transcendentalism, you have the divinity of nature. It's this sacred, beautiful, wonderful place. With naturalism, you have Mother Nature doesn't care about you, isn't sympathetic to you, isn't going to take care of you. Mother Nature is going to do what Mother Nature is going to do, and we are all sort of powerless to stop it. And you also see a lot of despair in stories of naturalism. So I think that you probably picked up on these stories can kind of feel like a little bit of a bummer. It is very much the man versus the wild, but instead of this heroic romantic idea of a man triumphing over the wild, what you get is men often powerless and helpless against the wild. Two of the most famous stories in the naturalist tradition are Stephen Crane's The Open Boat and Jack London's To Build a Fire. The Open Boat is the story that you're going to read. To Build a Fire is the story of a man in the Alaskan wilderness trying to start a fire to survive, and sort of nature's brutality against him throughout that. It's a great story. I'll include that in your notes and resources as well. But For Stephen Crane's story, you're reading The Open Boat. Now, again, we have a story that is based in real life. Stephen Crane was was in a shipwreck, essentially. So he was traveling to Cuba to cover Cuban insurrection against Spain when the ship that he was on, which was the Commodore, sank, and Crane spent a day and a half in a lifeboat with several other men awaiting rescue. Now remember, this is in the early 1900s. There's no such thing as like GPS or beacons or anything like that. They're just sort of out there on their own. So this is very much based on Stephen Crane's own experiences. Now, Stephen Crane, of course, survived and went on to write this story, and I think that The Open Boat really is the quintessential naturalist story. And what you'll see in this story is that nature is not a setting. Nature is not just where they are. Nature and the ocean and the sea are personified to be a character. And one of the debates in the scholarly research on this story is nature a protagonist or an antagonist? Is nature helping them or hurting them? And within the naturalist tradition, remember, nature doesn't care. Nature is just doing its thing, and we as people, as mankind, are subject to nature's whims, to what nature wants us to do. That is a determined future that we are helpless to stop. And that's what you see in Stephen Crane's The Open Boat. There are a lot of parallels between this naturalist survival story and a lot of modern literature today. I think some people, it can be really interesting to compare naturalist stories to what is our the nature that we are powerless against today in modern society. So that's an interesting thing to think about. I really look forward to hearing what you all have to say about this one.